In next auth, we have this concept of providers, which are services that we can use to sign in a user. So here on the documentation, on the left, let's expand providers. All right, look here, we have various services or providers like Apple for allowing people to sign in with their Apple account. We have Auth0, we have Azure Active Directory, and a ton of other services. We have email, Facebook, Google, GitHub, and so on. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to allow users to sign in with their Google account. So let's look at this provider. Here you can find the documentation for setting this up, which I'm going to show you in this video. We also have this configuration page, which is the credentials page on Google Cloud Platform. So let's click on this link. Now I'm currently logged into Google Cloud. If you don't have an account, you're not going to see this. So first create an account and sign in, and then come back to the documentation for Google Provider and click on this link. If you have a project, select it from here. Otherwise, create a new project. Let's give this a name. I'm going to call this my next app. Okay. All right, our project is created. Next, we need to configure the consent screen. This is the screen that Google will show to our users saying such and such app wants to access your information. So let's click here. All right, here we have to specify the type of our users. We have two options. We can go with internal if our application is internal to our organization. With this, we don't have to submit our application for verification. But if you're building a public-facing website where anyone can log in via Google, then we have to select external. Now, if we select external, our application will start in testing mode and will only be available to users that we add as our test users. Once we are ready to push our application to production, then we need to submit our application for verification. So Google is going to look at our application and make sure this application is not for malicious activities. Okay. Now let's go ahead. All right. So here on the right side, you can see the preview of the consent screen. So it says app name wants to access your Google account. You have seen it before. Okay. So let's set the app name here, my next app. Then we add the support email. We can optionally add a logo. I'm going to leave it out for now. Next, we have to specify our application's homepage, as well as the links to privacy policy and terms of service. Initially, when we are in the testing mode, we don't have to provide these. But later, when we want to push our application to production, we have to add the links here so Google can verify our application. So I'm going to leave it out. Next, we have authorized domains. Again, this is optional for testing, so let's leave it out. And finally, we have to specify the developer's contact information. So add your email here. Then click Save and Continue. All right, on the second page, we have to specify the scopes, which are the permissions we are requesting our users to authorize. So here we have to specify what pieces of information about our users we want to access. So let's click Add or Remove Scopes. Here we have a list of scopes. I'm going to select email so we can access our user's email address. We can also select profile, and with this, we can see any personal information the user has made public. Now let's click Update. All right, so here are the non-sensitive scopes we have selected. We can delete them if you want to. Now let's move on to the next page. All right, here we have to specify our test users. So when our application is in the testing mode, we can register up to 100 users. So let's add a test user. Only these users will be able to log into our application. So I'm going to add my email. All right. Now let's save and continue. We're almost done. So here's the confirmation page with all the information we have provided. Now let's go back to the dashboard. So here's what we have done so far. This is the name of our app. We can always change it. Publishing status is currently testing. Later in the future, when we are ready to push our application to production, we'll come back and publish it here. The type of user is external. We can change it to internal if we want to. Down here, you can see the OAuth user cap. So this is where we can see our test users. We have a cap of 100 test users. Currently, we have registered a single user. And down below, you can see our test users. Now let's go to the credentials page. On the top, click Create Credentials and select OAuth Client ID. Now, what is OAuth? OAuth is short for Open Authentication, and it's a standard authentication protocol that a lot of websites like Google, Facebook, Twitter, and so on implement. With OAuth, we can allow our users to log in with their Google or Twitter accounts. So when someone wants to log into our website via Google, our application redirects the user to Google. Then Google will identify or authenticate the user, and finally will send them back to our application. This is the OAuth protocol, okay? So our application is going to be a client of Google's OAuth protocol, okay? So now let's create an OAuth client ID. All right, first we have to select the application type. We're going to select web application. Next, we specify our application's name by next app. Then we need to add two URLs. The first one is authorized JavaScript origins. We're going to set that to the root of our website, which is localhost port 3000. And for production, we can add another one here, like example.com. We don't need it now, so let's delete it. We should also authorize redirect URI. So this is the URI or the URL that Google will use to send the user back to our application. We can get this URL from the provider page on NextAuth documentation. So we're looking at Google Provider. Down here under configuration, you can see the authorized redirect URL. So for production, we have to use a URL like this. For development, we're going to use a URL like this. So /API/auth/callback/Google. So earlier we registered a route handler for handling requests that start with /auth. This is an example of the endpoints that will be exposed in our application once we set up NextAuth, okay? So let's grab this URL and add it right here. And finally click Create. All right, we're almost done. So now we have created an OAuth client. We have a client ID, which identifies our application, and client secret, which is like a password our application uses to talk to Google. Now we need to copy these values and store them in our env file. So first I'm going to copy the client ID. Now back to our env file, let's add a new key here, Google_client_ID. We set it to this value. And another one, Google_client_secret, which we set to this other value. All right, we're almost there. Now back to the documentation. Next, we need to create a Google provider. So we're going to go in the route file that we created in the previous lesson and import Google provider from this package, and then set it as one of our providers in our NextAuth configuration object. So let's copy this line. Now we go back to the route file that we created earlier and import this Google provider. Now, when creating this NextAuth object, we set our providers. So we set providers to an array, and in this array, we can have one or more providers. Here, we're going to use a Google provider. We call this and give it an object. In this object, we set client ID to process.env.google_client_ID. So with process.env, we can read our environment variables. And here we're reading the value of an environment variable called Google Client ID. Similarly, we set client secret to process.env.google_client_secret. Now here we have a TypeScript error saying type string or undefined is not assignable to type string. The reason we see this is because the type of this property is string, so it doesn't accept undefined values, but process.env.google_client_ID might be undefined. So if we don't set this environment variable, of course, it doesn't have a value. But in this case, we know that we have set this up properly, so we can put an exclamation mark at the end and tell the TypeScript compiler that we definitely have a value stored in this variable. Let's do that one more time. All right, the error is gone. Now the final step. Let's add the sign-in link to our nav bar. So we go to our nav bar, and here we add a new link to API/auth/signing. So this is another endpoint that is exposed by next auth. Okay. So we add login or sign in here. Now let's test our application. So here's our login link. It's currently too close to users. So let's add a bit of styling here. So up here, we have used the flex class. Now with this, we can add another class called space x3 to give these flex items some horizontal space. All right, that's better. Now let's click login. So this page is automatically generated by NextAuth. As we register more providers, we'll have other buttons here for signing in with, let's say, Twitter, GitHub, and so on. Let's sign in with Google. All right, this is our consent screen. You can see the name of our app and the users. So earlier I registered this user as a test user, and I can only sign in with this user. Let's sign in. Lovely. So now I'm signed in, but we don't see the name of the current user. We'll come back and implement it later.